Welcome back to You and Your Money. We're discussing estate planning. My guests are a very happy Harry Joffe and Gordon Stewart. If you'd like to email me, you can send your query to info@anchorcapital.co.za. Harry, you haven't mentioned anything about Liverpool.
Well, I wanted you to bring it up,
Look
Bryan.
how happy you are today.
Top of the log.
Yeah, hey.
About to win the league. I hope you'll be coming to my big party I'm going to throw when Liverpool win the league, Bryan.
Yeah, the league's never been won in October, but anyway.
For me it has.
Okay, so let's just talk about, we talk about a joint will. What are the advantages or disadvantages of having a joint will, Harry?
Bryan, I'll be honest, I don't like a joint will. There's no benefit to me in having a joint will. You know, as I always say to clients, a will's not something romantic. You know, you're going to be dead. Your spouse stroke partner is going to be spending your money with their new friend or new lover. Why do you want to have a joint will? What does it actually give you? You can do a mirror will. A mirror will is something very different. A mirror will where the one partner leaves everything to the other and the other one leaves everything to the other partner. So that's a mirror will. But a joint will carries with it all these dangers. So first of all, first spouse or first partner dies. Now you've got the surviving spouse. Do they need to update the will? Do they need to change it? Can they even change it?
Can they?
And that's the question. Depends on what the first will says. Because the first will might say, I leave everything to the survivor on condition that if they accept, they have to do the following, and then they're stuck. So I don't see any benefit of a joint will because in addition, they might want to nominate different executors. They might want to nominate different trustees. They might want to do different things. So a joint will to me is just old-fashioned and backward, and I wouldn't do it. You can do a mirror will by all means if you want to, but a joint will carries with it the dangers that when the first dying spouse dies, the second surviving spouse thinks they don't need to update, but they might need to update.
Okay. Well,
Bryan, if I could just quickly jump in there. I think there, you know, in my years of doing this, there's sometimes a perception that if you have a joint will, then there's an element of control to the extent that the other spouse cannot change that their part of the will, which they are allowed to do. So I think to me, you know, Harry summed it up beautifully, but I would just say that the only benefit of a joint will is that you save paper.
Okay. Okay, Harry, this is one for you, particularly because you're in Mauritius. There seems to be a scheme in the market using Section 42, which allows companies that have private companies to transfer their shares and actually transfer their shares to an international company set up in Mauritius, which will allow assets, the shareholding to be held in Mauritius through a company which is owned by a trust. And there seems to be the belief that there'll be no capital gains tax using Section 42, and you can maybe comment on that in a moment, Harry. But what they're also expecting is that they'll be able to distribute dividends at a lower percentage, because I think dividends in Mauritius are 10%, not at 20%. Do you know anything about this, Gordon?
Yeah, I do, Harry. It's actually something that's quite common, quite popular. So I think let's just start off to say that the Section 42 is used to restructure at the South African level. And it can be done by anyone at any stage. It doesn't even have to have any involvement from a Mauritius perspective. So it's not a requirement to have a business in Mauritius. But the Section 42 in South Africa can form part of the bigger looping structure. So it's a mechanism that is being suggested by SA tax advisors to postpone CGT and other duties. In your example, when a foreign company wants to acquire shares in a South African company. So to answer your question with regards to the dividend withholding tax, so provided that the foreign company has a double taxation agreement with South Africa. So for example, the Channel Islands, this would not work. And the foreign shareholding is greater than 10% in the South African company, then the dividend withholding tax should apply, or the reduction in dividend withholding tax should apply, reducing it in South Africa from 20% to 5%. So what we are seeing, what we're seeing is individuals, they set up an offshore trust in Mauritius, they set up a Mauritian tax resident company, the Global Business License Company. They then do a restructuring in South Africa, where they've maybe got a trading operation, and if they had to sell the shares in that trading operation to the Mauritian company, it would trigger enormous CGT. So then they create a Section 42 company or a new holding company. They rely on Section 42. They transfer the shares that they have in the existing company, and in exchange, they get shares in the new holding company. That's the Section 42. And then in the new holding company, the Mauritius company will then take an equity stake, maybe a different share class.
Are
So
you
that's kind
comfortable
of
with
it
that?
in a
Are you
nutshell.
comfortable with that structure, Gordon?
Yes, perfectly legitimate, perfectly legal.
Okay. Well, let's get some emails. First one for you, Harry. Janet in Glendower says, what is happening in the Master's office as they seem to be taking so much longer to provide any information, to provide, get the states finalised? Surely they're looking for their funds, and what is actually happening?
Yeah, Brian, I mean, that's a difficult one to answer. I don't want to get too negative about the Master's office. I think everyone's read in all the newspapers about the challenges they're going through. You know, some of the masters have been suspended, some of the assistant masters have been suspended. There's just been a new chief master appointed in Joburg. There's a process they're working through. They're trying to upgrade now to become more system-based and less paper-based, which has taken them a while. I'd rather, instead of complaining about it, I'd rather look at what clients should be doing, what viewers should be doing. I think two things that are important. First of all, you know, if you've got a life insurance policy, you don't want it paying into your estate, because then it's going to be tied up in the state distribution process and the winding up process. If you've got a life insurance policy, please make sure you've got a beneficiary on the policy, and that beneficiary is, of course, still alive and surviving you. You know, just make sure it doesn't end up paying into the state, number one. And number two, Brian, I mean, a very simple piece of advice as well. If viewers are investing in South African assets, if they can, they should route it through an endowment policy. You know, if you're going to buy a unit trust directly, that's, of course, an asset in your estate. Or if you pass away, it has to go through the estate. If you wrap that unit trust into an endowment policy, then, of course, you nominate a beneficiary on the endowment policy, and when you pass away, they can pay direct to the beneficiary. And then you're bypassing the master. So I think at this stage, just make sure at least you've got policies in place to bypass the master's office and bypass the estate, and it saves the executives fees, and it's a much quicker process.
I think what's also important, Harry, is you understand the implications of an endowment policy.
Yes.
Endowment policy has to be for 5 years, and there are some costs that you wouldn't have if you'd gone direct. I mean, if you go directly through an endowment policy into unit trust,
Yes.
you've got the additional cost of the endowment policy.
Well, not always, Brian, not always. I mean, if you look at the straight like for like, very often there aren't extra costs in the endowment policy, because unless they're charging you platform fees, which are often going to be in the unit trust as well, the advisor's fee will be the same. There often aren't major differences in costs. The 5-year problem isn't really there, because most companies will offer you, you know, sub-policies as well, where you can have
Where you can come out.
Where you can come out at least once.
The amount you put in plus 5% compound.
Correct, and you might have sub-policies. You know, what we do typically with our offshore endowments, you have 100 sub-policies, so you've got 100 withdrawals potentially as well. So I don't see that as being an issue.
Okay. Then Gordon, Philip and Leslie say, and this is to save them obviously having to consult with anyone. We are getting married soon. Please, if I can just see the rest of the. Please explain the different marriage regimes, and is it important to have a will immediately? Just a brief answer to that one, Gordon.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think first of all, congratulations. So in a nutshell, Brian, there's 3 types of marital contracts. You get married in community of property, so where in essence you have one combined estate and you share everything. Not something that I would typically recommend or suggest. Then you get the married under the antenuptial contract with accrual, in which case then you share from the date of marriage, subject to a particular formula at the end of the marriage. And then you get married A and C excluding accrual, which is basically what's mine is what yours is yours, and never the two shall meet. So the type of marital contract will determine what type of claim the one spouse has against the other's estate, either on death or on divorce. If I'm just going to look at it from a death perspective, so look, dying without a will means that the individual dies intestate. So whilst the surviving spouse will have a possible claim against the deceased estate, it's a lot more complicated to wind up this type of estate. So I would say that it's very important that they prepare their wills as soon as possible after getting married. And on that, being the prophet of doom and gloom, and while I know it's not something that they're probably considering, just as they're about to get married, but maybe just remember that you've got 3 months to change your will if you get divorced. So if you die 3 months after getting divorced, then your ex will inherit as per the will.
Bryan, sorry, if I just want to make a
Beneficiary
point.
forms, also 3 months.
No. So just carrying on with what Gordon said, please, they should never ever get married in community or property. That is just not done anymore. The problem with getting married in community, of course, is you share debt. You know, and if one of the spouses goes off on a frolic of their own and starts running up debt, the other spouse is responsible. So they're very rarely, if ever, should they ever get married in community or property. Please, another angle as well, once they're getting married, of course, and they're spouses, let them take policies and they can make each other the beneficiaries. And then, of course, there's no estate duty. They get the paragraph 4Q deduction if they nominate each other as beneficiaries on their policies. They should, as Gordon said, do a will. If they've got an existing will, of course, they want to update it. And again, at the same point, whatever they leave to each other in their wills, the paragraph 4Q deduction applies, and there's no estate duty on top of the R3.5 million abatement.
Harry, just one thing. Gordon mentioned 3 months to change a will. What
On
about
divorce.
a change of a
No,
beneficiary?
that's in terms of the Wills Act, which only applies to assets in your estate. It doesn't apply to life insurance policies, which are not assets in the estate. So
if you're getting divorced, if you're in the process of getting divorced, you should change your beneficiary now.
I would say, Bryan, if your wife looks at you in the wrong way or your husband looks at you in the wrong way, change the beneficiary. Don't wait to get divorced.
Okay.
Or your spouse.
I'm going to go just past this one. I want to talk a little bit very much about the question about customary marriages, but I don't think we're going to have enough time to deal with it. We will deal with it on the next program. So forgive me, Rowena. I just want to get down to Jack in Milton. He says, please explain the clause in the will where it talks about that any benefit from a member benefit shall be excluded from the marital regime. How binding and protected is that?
Okay, Bryan, so it's carrying on with what Gordon said. So if you're married in community or property, then of course there's one estate, as Gordon said. So if your parent, say, for example, leaves an asset, that asset would become part of the community estate and this other partner or spouse would share in it. So that clause in the will, which I call the standard cockroach clause, which says any asset I leave to my children shall not form part of the community estate if they're married in community. It protects the spouses against each other, inter partes as we call it. So if there's a divorce, that's not a community asset. But, very importantly, and there's court cases on this already, it doesn't protect the spouses if one of them goes insolvent. So let's assume you leave an asset to your child, they're married in community or property, their spouse goes insolvent, the creditors will attach that asset, even though it's not a joint estate asset, because both spouses then go insolvent.
And if you're married ANC with or without accrual?
No, that's a different story, because that accrual only kicks in on the end of the marriage.
Is that fully protected?
That's protected. But Bryan, just to advise to viewers.
Gordon wanted to come in?
No, I was just agreeing 100%. Under ANCs, those are protected.
Okay.
I think also just remember, it's not just that in wills where you will find that clause, Bryan, you also find it in trust deeds.
Correct.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Unfortunately, as usual, we run out of time. But I was really surprised when the latest numbers were released about how many people have made use of the two-pot retirement system. 1.2 million applications, 200,000 rejected, and many of them rejected because of giving false taxable income to avoid paying taxes. 21.4 billion paid out, and I've not got the figure, but I would imagine somewhere between 4 to 6 billion of this paid to SARS. Harry, Gordon, thank you for joining me this evening. It's important to note our program is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program, we'll be dealing with healthcare. Thank you for watching, and good night.